In this video, we'll be looking at the intercept method of graphing. The intercept method of graphing is particularly useful when we have linear equations that are written in standard form. Just a quick review of that. Standard form of a linear equation is ax plus by equals c. When a linear equation is written in standard form, the intercept method is often the quickest way of generating a graph for that equation. Before we get to the practice problems, let's review the intercept method of graphing. In order to use the intercept method of graphing a linear equation, we begin by algebraically finding the x-intercept, and we do that by replacing y with 0 and solving the equation for x. Similarly, we algebraically find the y-intercept by replacing x with 0 and solving for y. I want to pause briefly just to emphasize how important this concept really is. A lot of students taking elementary algebra are tempted to kind of gloss over this lesson, and they don't really learn that connection between the algebra and the graphing. It's really important for you to know that any point on the x-axis has a y-coordinate of 0. That's why we find the x-intercept by replacing y with 0. And also, you need to know that any point on the y-axis has an x-coordinate of 0. That's why we find the y-intercept by replacing x with 0. So learn that well now so that you know it in the future. You're going to have to know this in future math classes, not just in this math class. All right. Once we know the intercepts for our graph, we can plot those intercepts and then use those points to help us draw the line representing the equation. So with all of that in mind, let's move ahead and look at the practice problems. We're going to use the intercept method to graph the equation 4x plus 6y equals 12. Let's begin by algebraically finding the x-intercept. In order to find the x-intercept algebraically, we replace y with 0. So instead of 4x plus 6y equals 12, we now have 4x plus 6 times 0 equals 12. 6 times 0 is just 0, and 4x plus 0 is just 4x. So our simplified equation is 4x equals 12. When we solve this equation, we end up with x equals 3. So now we know that the x-intercept is 3. To write this as an ordered pair, we write 3, 0. Now that we've determined the x-intercept, it's time to find the y-intercept algebraically. In order to determine the y-intercept, we take the original equation and replace x with 0. So instead of 4x plus 6y equals 12, we have 4 times 0 plus 6y equals 12. 4 times 0 just gives us 0, and 0 plus 6y is just 6y. So we can simplify the left side and write our equation as 6y equals 12. When we solve this equation, we end up with y equals 2. And that gives us our y-intercept. To write this as an ordered pair, we write the ordered pair 0, 2. And now we have both of our intercepts. Now it's time to plot these intercepts and use those to help us graph the equation. Before I graph this equation, I need to label the axis on my grid. There's the x-axis and there's the y-axis. And I also need to put some numbers on. There we go. And now that I've got a coordinate plane to use, it's time to graph the x-intercept, which is 3, 0. So I've plotted the point 3, 0 on the x-axis. Now I can plot the point 0, 2 on the y-axis. There it is. And now that I have my points, I can use them to draw the line that represents this equation. There's the line right there. So at this point, I have a line representing the equation 4x plus 6y equals 12. Let's move on to the next practice problem. We want to use the intercept method to graph the equation negative 16x plus 20y equals negative 80. The first step is to algebraically find the x-intercept. So let's do that now. In order to find the x-intercept algebraically, we replace y with 0. So instead of negative 16x plus 20y equals negative 80, we have negative 16x plus 20 times 0 equals negative 80. Of course, 20 times 0 is just 0, and negative 16x plus 0 is just negative 16x. So my simplified equation is negative 16x equals negative 80. And when we solve this equation, we end up with x equals 5. This indicates that the x-intercept for our line is 5. If we want to write that as an ordered pair, we write the ordered pair 5, 0. Now that we've determined the x-intercept, let's go ahead and find the y-intercept algebraically. In order to find the y-intercept algebraically, we're going to replace x with 0. So instead of negative 16x plus 20y equals negative 80, we're going to write negative 16 times 0 plus 20y equals negative 80. And negative 16 times 0 is just 0. 0 plus 20y is just 20y. So our simplified equation is 20y equals negative 80. When we solve this, we end up with y equals negative 4. This indicates that the y-intercept of our graph will be negative 4. In order to write that as an ordered pair, we would write 0, negative 4. Now that we know both of the intercepts, it's time to plot them and then draw the line representing this equation. Once again, I'm going to label and number my axes before I plot the line. There we go. And now I can plot the x-intercept, 5, 0. There it is. And next we're going to graph the y-intercept, which is 0, negative 4. And there's that point. Now that I have 2 points to use, I can draw the line representing this equation. And there it is. So now I have the line representing the equation negative 16x plus 20y equals negative 80. This concludes our video on the intercept method of graphing.